conversation. So let me just ask a generic kind of question and get some feedback in terms of what this has meant to you, and what it is that you think we should do, with the idea that maybe all of us in this room are a commoning, if you like, and what we have in common is that we want to actually start to end up with a common vision, which is, of course, always very sensitive to particularities and differences and all the rest of it, recognizing that if you're being threatened by a dam in Brazil, your political activism is going to be very different than if you're an oppressed tenant in Crown Heights, but everybody has something in common out of this, and what is it that we can put together so that we become much stronger in terms of our individual actions versus what we might be able to do just simply staying in the silos, as was mentioned earlier. So let me, with that idea, sort of throw the floor open and get some reactions from you. If you feel like giving reactions, if not, we'll just go off to 16 Beaver and drink and have a party, which I'm more in favour of. So don't think you'll bother me if you say, no, oh, come on, let's get out of here and go have a party. It's party time. That's fine. But I thought this might be an opportunity to get some feedback, which I personally would value a great deal. So anybody got some comments they want to make? Microphones around.
I would just say also that maybe, because saying it like feedback could create, I think it's also really interesting to try to go further using this time in thinking about some of the different questions that have come up. It's a kind of another proposal than feedback. It's just really, what are some thoughts that this time together has raised? And so maybe in relation to that, I was thinking a lot about, because it was the last session, in relation to the question of the state, and I felt, especially afterward, one of the biggest things that I felt was also missing in relation to that conversation is just seeing all the damage, from policing to prisons to ecological ruin that the neoliberal state is producing. And so the question, if we're really going to take this up, and confront it, how do we do it in a way that is also, I would say, realistic in terms of what the effects of kind of disastrous, effects of the state are. And yesterday you talked about Bloomberg, for instance, doing a good job. I mean, for me, it's kind of incredibly difficult to hear something like that, because even in that case, I mean, there might be workers who are doing a good job, or cleaning things, spills, and taking care of things. But it seems to me that part of the challenge is also a question of our imagination and construction of situations that we also inherit. So what's the difference between a collectively managed sewer system by the workers who know best how it works than some hierarchical system that then would have a mayor take credit for that, And so in a way, I just feel like even some of the benefits of the state that we inherit don't necessarily require this kind of hierarchical organization to produce it. But I guess my real point is, if we're really going to have a conversation about something like the state, how do we also include with it really the most disastrous parts of it, which is what we're experiencing today? It doesn't mean that corporations aren't involved in that. It just means that it's clearly a tool at this stage for advancing these kinds of agendas.
there's one on that side and one on this side, so and one in the back.
Yeah, I mean, I was meant to participate in the final panel, and luckily for me, I don't have to. We can go to the pub and drink a lot sooner. But one of the things that's been kind of playing on my mind a while is that, I mean, I've not really got any direct experience of kind of commons activity, local forms of resistance. I've always been much more kind of driven by macro questions and what it is we understand by capitalism. So one of the kind of comments or questions I'd like to put to the floor is, I mean, how do we see the role of technology and scale as playing something in a generalizable social alternative, which doesn't rely upon intentional communities or a kind of moral vision, but as a general social application. So I'm trying to kind of think in the contradiction of some of the things that we can take advantage in terms of productivity, but under a new social form of organisation, and how that implicates some of the discussions around scale and the commons and creative alternatives.
First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to discuss these issues. I do mean it, that it was a very inspirational 2 days, and I think it's extremely important to think about these visions, both for our own mental health, I think, but also for actually moving forward. And what I feel that we could discuss later on is, I think one of the best thing about the left is how it embraces difference in its thinking, but it's also a difficulty in terms of organizing. It actually came up even within these 2 days that we think about a lot of issues very differently, and I think that's beautiful, and I'm sure most of us think that's actually one of the most beautiful things about leftist thinking, that we embrace these differences, but then when it comes to common organizing, which is inevitable to moving forward, then it becomes oftentimes a difficulty. So I think, and there was a lot of talking about how important it is to organize together across class, cross gender, cross race, cross borders, but we didn't really talk about how to do that. And I'm sure that there are really good examples of that, and a few of them were fleshed out, but we didn't really have the chance to actually discuss how these people build those alliances, and I would be really curious of that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, as well, and also saying, I came to this rather late, I could only get here this afternoon, so I'm not really taking in a lot of what's happened the last couple of days, so I apologize for that. But I just had a direct comment, maybe in integrating these discussions of commons and technologies and roles of scale. I'm only starting to think through this myself, but how I understand the potentials of thinking through commons is one of and this qualitative dimension that you were talking about as well. What is the primary element of the qualitative dimension of governing of the commons, which is different, is this collective definition of goals and priorities. And if you have commons as a mode of social organization, which is what you suggested, then that wouldn't be moral free, and it would have to go into the technology and the scales that would be a part of it, would be the guiding mode of it, as I understand it. But I'm really, I've been inspired by the discussions here and would be really interested in people's opinions on
I want to phrase this in the least obnoxious possible way, but I might screw that up.
It's fine.
I think that the conversation, the theoretical conversation, the intellectual conversation was extremely well done. I thought that the way that a lot of it was formulated, of what I saw, I was working yesterday and then I came late, and I was working part of today and then I came late, but much of what I saw I thought was really, really good. And I thought that the conversations and the different, the distinctions between people was very interesting. But, so then I have instead a structural and organizational problem, which is that, and I know that this is a difficult, thing to figure out, it's a difficult, thing to try to do, but there is an organizational style that says if we're going to have a forum where we're going to talk about things that are really great, that we have to make sure that 20% of the room or 40% of the room is working class, not people with, I don't have a college degree, I don't know how many other people in the room don't, but I'd love to know that I wasn't alone. And, it's like, it would be, you can fail at that 20 or 40%, but to actually say, we're going to try to make sure that a significant portion of the people that are in the room at a really wonderful, really free, anti-capitalist conference like this are people from the working class who have contributions to make and have a lot, like myself, to gain from this. That's a structural and organizational question when we do these conferences again and again in New York City, when we bring amazing people from all over the world and from across academia and different far-left theoretical bases, that we also say we're going to make a commitment, whether we fail or not completely, and we're going to set goals, and then we're going to try to fill that room with a significant portion of people who are exploited, not just at the academic adjunct grad student level. I love all of you, and I think that this was great, though.
So I'm going to go a couple of ways with this. One, I want to respond to the request that was just made or the statement that was just made to say the one thing I've always appreciated as a community organizer and an activist is the opportunity within the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics to invite people on the ground into the space. I can't change the dynamic of people in their beliefs that say all academia does is spew theory without going into that space and trying to learn. But I will say I organized 2 panels here and I had freedom to organize panels. And I didn't reach out to academia, right? I reached out to community-based organizations. I knocked on doors. I went in and invited people into the space and I said, it's free. It don't cost you a cent. You just have to bring your ass in here, right? So, it's not a direct challenge at you, but the opportunity was there. And, it's one of the same way I closed that last panel. I have some critiques of the way we organize and what happens here and how we're going to make change. And the reason why I gravitate across waters is because I learned so much. And I learned from folks like Mavi, and I try to bring those experiences back here and share it. But if you have people on the ground that are resistant to it, it offers big challenges. I can, and I don't think the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics or Dr. David Harvey need me to say that they open up the space, but it's a free space. And they reach out to the community, and they constantly reach out to community-based organizations to invite them into the space. But there's this whole thing that folks in it, there's this tension in the community about what happens when you come into these spaces. Maybe one of the ways we can change that a little bit is to take it outside of university spaces, bring it into the community. In some way, I close a lot of these things that I do say, let's bring this out into the community. That's the other way we do it. So that's one way. I think, Dave, to kind of answer your question and is there any pluses or minuses? I think one thing we could do probably in the future is make it a little bit longer, because somebody said, I think it was Marianne who said, I want to learn more about the organizing strategies, right? And I would love to, and Mavi will be here all week, but, some of these different groups, especially from the international community, to hear about their strategies and tactics. I think it's such a valuable experience, and I would love to see more people in the room. So if we could maybe make them longer in the future so that some of that can happen, right? I think that would be
Should I talk?
I was wondering, what do the long-term unemployed people do? Since unemployment is, I think, rising only because partly they're not even counting us. We're no longer even on the rolls looking. So people who aren't making money, how are they surviving around this country? And certainly there's armies of unemployed throughout the world, far larger. So that's my question. How can they find each other and organize?
Two points related. So, first of all, I'd like the conference. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, Rob, for reaching out. As we talk about capitalism in the title and in the conference, we've really focused on the economic structure primarily, but obviously the culture that is created in capitalism we've alluded to, but haven't focused on as much, so much of that. The culture that then bolsters it and brainwashes most of us who are not really beneficiaries of it to end up believing in it and be so fearful of any alternative. So I just hope in the future we can give some more attention to those, it's a very complex, huge issue, the cultural aspects, and then really as we focus on creating alternatives, some really creative discussion about creative approaches to creating alternative culture, even while we exist within the capitalist structures. And obviously there's issues of, church, school, media, those big institutions, but then there's stuff within our own lives that we can do to begin, this is really my second point, to model the alternative, right? To model the other world that's possible even while we're suffering under this structure. Because I think it's a real small percentage of people who will be attracted to alternatives based on the theory. I think most people are going to be attracted based on what they actually experience. And when you model, if people are part of a co-op, and they really experience, there are challenges to co-ops too, but if you experience both the material benefits and the process of democracy and you feel like an owner and be respected, then it's harder for you to then suddenly step out and then accept being slapped in the face and just being a consumer and not treated with respect, etc. So when we look at things in our own lives and structures that we can have more control of and give more attention to about our academic relations and with the community, nonprofit management. I am a lifelong nonprofiter. I've also, experienced the slings and arrows of nonprofits and nonprofit culture sometimes, which I found to be sometimes worse than when I worked for the city. Ways in which we operate in our daily lives, family relations, child rearing, and there's a lot of stuff there, and I know it's huge, but I think there are some really meaningful dialogues which we can have even in confined space, and I think one of the things I really want to hold up are the issues about race and multiculturalism, which we still need to do a hell of a lot of work around, not just whining about it, but real concrete things. What are we doing in our lives and with our children? I'm a father of a 10-year-old. To help ensure, not that we're creating perfect people, but that next generation is really thinking in some fundamentally different ways than the prior generation did. And I think particularly around issues of race and multiculturalism, there's a lot of concrete stuff that if we got into real dialogue, we could say, I hadn't really thought about that. How we're ensuring greater exposure and interaction of our children with a broader set of ideals and peoples and cultures than we're exposed to and than we're exposed to in the academy. So just to wrap up very concretely, what is the culture required for that commons, the vision of our commons, or communalism, or the alternative society to be really different in our everyday relations? What's the culture that we want to promote, and how can we start promoting and modeling that culture today?
Hi, I think greed is a problem. Greed is a big problem. One creative alternative to greed is worker co-ops. I'd love to see workshops or a conference from successful co-ops. The largest co-op in the USA is on Fordham Road in the Bronx. There's another co-op 2 blocks south of here that's been in operation for 25 years. There's a lot of co-ops. I'd love to see conferences or workshops where people who founded these co-ops come in here to tell us what forms do you fill out to make a co-op? How do you get through the first day, the first week, the first month, the first year? How do you do it? Just real kind of nuts and bolts, let's move forward.
And actually, the labor panel yesterday did talk a fair amount about
Really,
co-ops.
Jackson, Mississippi? They just did that in Jackson, Mississippi.
I think there's a worker co-op conference here in like 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
Cool.
Network of worker cooperatives in New York City, or New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives. Worth checking out. I think they have something in the middle of June.
We have a question down here.
I was subjected the half of my life to one radical social system in Soviet Union, and now I subjected for the other half of my life to other radical social system, capitalism in the United States. And what I would like to say that level of oppression is the same. Yes! Different reasons, different tools, different propaganda, but oppression is the same. And actually this state is much successful than Soviet Union. But what I would like to say, I thought during 2 days about, first of all, about commons that yesterday I was in this discussion. Today I hear two people who devoted their lives to thinking about this subject. And also I thinking about my experience during life, I'm thinking that at the end it all comes how we can count our investment and distribution, and why it's always distributed so unevenly in society, and how we make this distribution more even. And this is, it's so far we counted it by tool which we call money. And money is easily could be obtained not by meaning to invest in something, but for example speculation or something else. And that tool that we really became unhappy with. So probably we just have to think, develop some kind of tool that I don't know about, I'm not sure about Bitcoin because it's easy to use for like narco business or whatever. But also there is very difficult, the society is already so developed. For example, it's so many questions. For example, what we are going to do with weapons. For example, in United States, so many weapons, and they're distributed through whole world, and neither organized group of people could stand up to all this scale and questions. So I have a lot to say more, but I probably stop here. Thanks.
I was just thinking of what might have been helpful is during, especially thinking of like resulting examples from other countries, if we kind of discussed afterwards, like maybe a little more concretely, specifically took it back to the United States and discussed, okay, so which of those models, or which of those ideas, or how do you think those could be implemented here, and how do we visualize that? I think that would have been really, have a discussion about that a little bit, I think might have been helpful.
So I was gonna make two suggestions. I have one. One was, it occurred to me right when Theo was giving his presentation and how he said you turned out 600 people in 12 hours through that messaging system.
So, so what I would have
It's
liked
gonna
to
look great on the video.
Maybe thinking about this hour as a workshop where we could have asked each other really specific questions. How do you organize something just like that messaging system? Where, you know, or how did X person organize that campaign? How did you, I found myself thinking, for instance, when Jean was speaking about her project, how did she get those two people, those two groups, the anti-racist group and the immigrant group, to actually talk to each other, even though they'd been on the same block and never talked to each other, right? So just really like, and I'm not super sure about extending the length of the panels rather than devoting a separate workshop to really concrete strategies and being able to ask those kinds of questions. And then the second thing, and this also kind of occurred to me after your panel earlier, is how to think about failure of our struggles, right? And definitely, I think everybody who was involved in Occupy kind of reeling with from that. How do you actually just deal with the failure of an anti-capitalist struggle? And I'm not somebody who thinks that just because that you know, that garage entrance was built, that the movement failed. But I do think that it would be useful to have like a session on how do you think about failure, what happens when a movement or a campaign fails, and what do you actually learn from that, and you know, so more, because a lot of our panels were very hopeful, and that's absolutely amazing and necessary, but we also have to kind of deal with, as organizers, what do you do when something doesn't work out, and how do you come back from it, and how do you like recover your energy and your hope?
Yeah, the Cuban Revolution was resurrected from a horrible, horrible failure where Castro was almost executed. So we can bounce back.
I just want to take the opportunity to say that there's an opportunity to follow through with Maliha's suggestion, because we are regathering at 16 Beaver after this, and we'll all be refreshed a bit by some food and drink. And there is the opportunity to decide that we would like to discuss some pointed or less pointed issues at that point. And also just to comment on the failure, I think if Jean were here, she would say it wouldn't necessarily be a failure because it's important for us to regroup and reinsert. So that might be also a way of thinking about what we are doing at Beaver. I've been cut off for some reason. Okay, I can hear myself. Okay, that's it.
I guess that's a call to wrap things up and go to Beaver, right? So I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you very much for your time.